Hey guys, it's Noel, this is Weezy Tech News, and today we've just got one story. We're going to be talking about the new products from Schiit Audio. Let's get into it. So Schiit have been busy with a few new products. First, we've got the Yggdrasil Plus, which is a new version of their flagship modular multi-bit DAC. The Yggdrasil Plus comes in 3 different configurations, starting with the less is more version, which costs $22.99. The Yggdrasil Plus can also be further configured to the more is less model, which costs $2,449, and the OG, which is basically the same model as the original, hence the name, which starts at $2,699. The prices I just mentioned are for the black models, and each model has an uptick of $100 for the silver version. I'm not going to go into any details about the specs of the Yggdrasil. High-end DACs are for people who really know what it is that they want and they've got the money to burn. So instead, I'm going to move on to the other stuff that Schiit have announced that suits the budget and the requirements of the rest of us mere mortals and fits more in with the niche of my channel. So announced a few days ago, Schiit have new versions of their incredibly popular entry-level all the way through to endgame, if we're honest, for most of us, a Magni headphone amplifier and Modi DAC. Seriously, for most of us, I think this is all that we will ever need. So the Modi Plus is the newest version of Schiit Audio's now 10-year-old Modi DAC family. It's been refined and updated for today's market. This one's using an ESS DAC chip, the ES9018. I'm not totally sure what chip was in the most recent outgoing model, but I believe it was an AKM chip. A lot of manufacturers had to move away from AKM due to supply issues when AKM's factory burned down in late 2020. But as Jay's 2 cents would say, I digress. For the new Modi Plus, we've got the same metal chassis with black and silver options. You've got RCA outputs, Toslink, optical and USB inputs, and the keen-eyed among you will notice that the USB connections are USB-C. You've got 2 USB sockets there. One is for dedicated power input and the other for the USB data connection to your computer. And that USB data connection uses Schiit's Unison USB interface that Schiit say provides complete electromagnetic and electrostatic isolation. I can't personally speak for how well that works, but I always use optical with my DACs because that gives me complete electromagnetic and electrostatic isolation. It's impossible to transfer any electronic interference via an optical cable. And perhaps a more niche application is the fact that it prevents any issues with ground loops when you're connecting multiple devices into the same amp or the same monitor controller, preamps and things like that. I assume that the Unison USB helps to separate the DAC from any noise that's going to be transmitted from the PC to the DAC via that USB cable. For the new Magni headphone amplifiers, they've got 2 models, the all discrete topology Magni Plus and the clean measuring integrated topology Magni Heretic. And if this sounds a lot like the previous models, that would be correct, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So in a lot of ways, the Magni Plus and Heretic are the same tried and true formula that made the originals a success. And frankly, I don't know how they managed to make these for this price. There's more than enough power to handle the vast majority of headphones. It's got a great build with a metal chassis made in America, and it's incredibly wallet friendly. Both Magni versions feature overcurrent and DC protections and muting relay, and both have low output impedance that's less than 0.2 ohms for the Magni Plus and less than 0.33 ohms for the Heretic, which means there should be no coloration with those low impedance headphones. Both are giving you 2.8 watts RMS of power at 16 ohms and 2.4 watts at 32 ohms, and that should be enough to get something like a 32 ohm DT770, which needs a lot of current, to nearly 130 dB. And both amps can also get to 215 milliwatts at 600 ohms, and that should be enough to get the 600 ohm DT880, which needs a lot of voltage, loud enough to be used as a police siren. I jest, of course, but seriously, that should be enough to get them to almost 120 dB. Obviously, please don't listen at that volume level. When you consider that safe volume levels are around that 70 dB and below for long-term listening, you've got 2 notoriously hard-to-drive headphones there being driven with ease with plenty of headroom. And we're talking about 50 to 60 dB of headroom here with the examples that I gave if you're looking at that 70 dB average volume level for long-term listening. So 50 to 60 dB of headroom, that is just plenty. I would say for 99.9% of people, this amount of power is more than you will ever need. I don't mean to oversimplify a complicated subject, but it's often vastly overstated in audio circles how much power that you actually need to run a headphone. People talk of headroom to allow for transient peaks without really clarifying that actually even most low budget amps of reasonable design are all more than capable of driving the vast majority of non-exotic headphones to well beyond any reasonable levels of volume, more than accounting for any headroom that might be required. I'm sure there are a few exceptions, there always are, so don't at me. I can hear the fingers of furious amplifier evangelists before I even publish this video. Regardless, the Magni is easily one of the most powerful of the budget amps that are around. That 2.4 watts at 32 ohms is really impressive. And so for 99.9% of people, this will not only be good enough for a starter amp, but also end game. I've always said, just go ahead and buy an amplifier like this and spend the rest of your money that you would have saved by not spending it on ridiculous amps and DACs that you don't need into lots of different headphones and taste the rainbow of headphone flavors that are out there. And if you are using a variety of different headphones, from sensitive IEMs at one end to power hungry full-size headphones at the other, then the new Magnis are giving you 3 different levels of gain selection, selectable by a toggle switch on the front. One of those is actually a negative gain for those most sensitive of earphones, which is a really good feature that I wish that way more amplifiers included. According to Schiit, the volume pot is of high spec and they sort them to ensure that they perform to standard. I don't see any exact specification of the volume pot that they're using, but the fact that it is sorted, and assuming that that's more than just lip service, should mean minimal channel balance issues, which is again super important, especially when you're using more sensitive earphones. And that was my main complaint with the X-Duo MT602. The volume pot had so much channel imbalance that it was almost unusable in certain positions. This is another area that is often overlooked by a lot of people that's arguably a lot more important than that max wattage specification. A dodgy volume pot will ruin even the best of devices. Now, all this attention to detail is not something that you generally see on more budget-oriented devices, with some exceptions such as the ones from JDS Labs, such as the Atom. Although whilst JDS Labs do make some absolutely superbly engineered products for a great price, they haven't managed to find a cost-effective way to put the Atom in a metal chassis. And whilst we're on the topic of volume pots, JDS Labs also hand-sort their pots to ensure channel balance is consistent, although that janky plastic knob they then put on afterwards leaves a lot to be desired from a user experience perspective. Saying that, I am still using my Gen 1 JDS Atom amp with the topping E30 DAC, and I've had my eye on the Schiit stack for a while now, but whilst the Magni has a lot more power than the Atom's 1 watt, even that 1 watt is actually plenty for the vast majority of headphones. To put it into perspective, the $99 Atom Plus, with a max continuous output of only 1 watt RMS at 32 ohms, would be able to get the 32 ohm DT770 and the 600 ohm DT880, both of them north of 120 dB. So when you look at it, there's really not actually that much difference between the Atom and the Magni. It's easy to get caught up on those spec sheet numbers, that 1 watt versus 2.4 watt, but they don't differ all that much in terms of output at the headphone, and that's due to the non-linear way that power scales with volume. On a certain fictional headphone, you might need 250 milliwatts to get to 120 dB. Pretty easy, I'd say, for probably most halfway decent headphone amplifiers, but to get to 130 dB, you'd need 2,500 milliwatts or 2.5 watts, and that's a huge jump. If you wanted to get to 140 dB, you would need 25 watts. Seriously. Honestly, this is probably a video topic in its own right, and once again, I digress. From my perspective, switching from the Atom to the Magni is a side grade. Still, from a user experience perspective, and you know that I like to get into the user experience on this channel, that Schiit stack would look great on my desk. And whilst the performance of the Atom is great, its plastic chassis with that cheap feeling volume knob is far from a premium experience. Even so, the JDS Atom stack does manage to undercut the pricing of the new Schiit stack. And that's the real kicker here with the new Magni and Modi, as both have gone up in price. The Modi Plus DAC is now $129 and the Magni amps are both priced at $109. This is a small but not insignificant jump from the older $99 price point. Gone are the days of the sub $200 Schiit stack. But almost everything has gone up in price these days, so perhaps this was inevitable. And according to Schiit, and this this might not provide much consolation, thanks to inflation, the cost of the new Magni and Modi are actually real-world price cuts when compared to previous pricing during more stable times. Well, I'm not an economist, but having seen the rise in our utility bills of late, it probably adds up. This price rise does complicate the equation somewhat, especially when products like iFi Audio's fantastic little Zen DAC combo can be had for less than $200. And sure, it doesn't provide anywhere near as much power, but as I mentioned before, on most headphones you're not going to need it. I mean, let's take a look at the iFi Zen DAC. It has enough power to get both the 32 ohm DT770 and 600 ohm DT880 north of 100 dB. Plus the Zen DAC also has balanced outputs which can output even more power on top of that. And that's not something that you usually see on devices of this price point. So yeah, it might not have the power of the JDS Atom or the Schiit Magni, but it's good enough for most people, and it's really hard to argue with the value of the iFi Zen DAC at $200. And that's why when I reviewed the Gen 1 Zen DAC last year, I'll put a link up here, I gave it a glowing review and I suggested that it could very well be the perfect starter DAC amp. Still, there is a lot of appeal to the Schiit stack. There's just something about it that appeals to me, and I do lean more towards separate DAC amp systems rather than combo units for the ability to mix and match or to upgrade individual components at any one time. It certainly looks really cool too. User experience is something that's often overlooked by audio purists, but there's a lot to be said for a well-designed, well-built and good-looking product that makes you actually want to use it, especially in this digital age that we live in today. You could sort of see your headphone amplifier as this physical interface to your digital music. Schiit are probably one of the most well-known audiophile companies outside of audiophile circles, and the Magni and Modi stack have been part of a de facto audiophile starter kit alongside headphones like Sennheiser's HD6XX for years, and anyone that spent any time on Reddit can attest to this. And I really don't see that changing anytime soon, as even with a $40 price hike to the price tag of the stack, I think it retains all the appeal that it always had. So I reckon if you are in the market for a decent DAC amp stack for a reasonable price, albeit a slightly less good one than before, but a good price considering the current market, I suppose, then the Schiit Magni and Modi stack probably still provides compelling value. Right, that's my thoughts on this new Schiit Modi and Magni. It's obviously not a review because I've not actually heard them, but that's just my analysis of the products themselves. I don't normally spend these news videos talking about one company or one product all the way through, but once I started writing this, I realized it's pretty much a 10-minute video by itself, and I just rambled on a little bit too much, probably. But hey, what do you think of these two new versions of the Schiit? Do you think the price difference actually makes all that much difference considering the current market, or was it inevitable, really? Regardless, that's all I've got for today, so make sure you do the whole like, subscribe, and all of that business, and I will see you in the next video, and until next time, have a good one.